The disappearance asterisk the sky above Delver 3 was dark and wild. Thick purple clouds moved fast, and lightning flashed in strange shapes. Inside a small metal house near the edge of the alien jungle, a young girl played with a glowing orb. Her name was Veli, and she was only 9 cycles old. Her giggles echoed off the cold walls. Bringing warmth to the gloomy evening, her older sister, Lyra, stood by the window, watching the storm build. She tapped the control panel, checking the weather. Sensors, but something felt wrong. The air was too quiet between the thunder, and the light flickered unnaturally. Veli kept playing, not noticing her sister's fear. Then, suddenly, the power cut out, and the house went completely dark. Lyra turned fast and called out to Veli. But the girl didn't answer. Her heart raced, and she ran into the next room. What she found made her freeze in shock. The door was wide open, the wind howling through it like a scream. The glowing orb lay cracked on the floor, and beside it was a small puddle of thick green slime belly. Lyra screamed, running out into the storm. Her bare feet hit the wet metal path as the rain poured down on her. She shouted her sister's name again and again, but only thunder answered. No lights from the neighbors turned on. No guards appeared. It was as if no one cared that a child had vanished. Hours passed, and Lyra returned, soaked and shaking. She begged the colony guards for help, but they only gave excuses. "There's a storm," they said. "We can't send drones." She probably ran off. Others mumbled, but Lyra knew the truth. Veli was taken. In the morning, the rain stopped, but the sky was still gray. Lyra stood alone outside the guard post, her eyes swollen from crying. No one from the colony joined her. No one even looked her way. She held the broken orb in her hand, the last thing her sister had touched. Then she heard boots behind her, slow and heavy. She turned and saw a human male standing there. He wore an old pilot jacket, stained and patched. A scar ran down his cheek, and his eyes looked tired but clear. "You looking for a girl?" he asked. Lyra blinked, unsure if she should answer. "I saw the light go out last night," he said. "Saw someone heading into the woods, carrying something." Lyra gasped and stepped forward. "Where?" she asked, voice shaking. The human pointed toward the eastern path where the forest grew thick. No one else seemed to care. "So I came to find you," he said. "Why?" Lyra asked, still cautious. "Because someone should," the man replied. He crouched and looked at the slime on the ground near the house. He touched it with a small tool, scanning the texture. "This isn't from any creature I know," he said, "and it's fresh." Lyra felt hope rise and fear mix with it. "You believe me?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply, "and I'm going to help." Lyra stared at him, unsure how to respond. No one had offered help, not her own kind. Not the guards, not even the elders. Now this human, a stranger, stood ready to risk his time and safety for a girl he didn't know. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Callan," he said, standing back up. "And yours?" "Lyra," she said. "Well, Lyra," Callan said with a half smile, "let's go get your sister back." They packed quickly, taking only what they needed. Callan carried a scanner, some rations, and a plasma knife. Lyra brought the cracked orb, hoping Veli's scent might help them track her. As they moved into the jungle, Lyra looked back at the silent colony. So many people had walked by her pain without even stopping, but this one human, with nothing to gain, had chosen to step forward. She didn't know if they would succeed. She didn't even know if Veli was still alive. But for the first time since the storm began, she didn't feel alone. The jungle was thick and wet, branches dripping water and glowing insects buzzing past. They walked in silence. Only the soft hum of Callan's scanner breaking the quiet, and somewhere, not too far ahead, a little girl waited in darkness, and something was keeping her there. The ground beneath. Their boots changed from smooth metal to soft mud. Trees grew taller here, their silver leaves rustling like whispers in the wind. Lyra had never walked this deep into the jungle. The colony always warned that nothing returned from the eastern side. But Callan walked like he'd been here before. His hand stayed near his sidearm, and his eyes scanned every shadow. Lyra followed, closely, clutching the cracked orb like a heart. Rain still dripped from the canopy above, creating slow music over leaves. "We're getting close," Callan said quietly. "How do you know?" Lyra asked, her voice hushed. He held up the scanner, its screen blinking in low pulses. "This slime. It matches a species I've seen before, off-world slavers." Lyra's blood went cold. "You mean she's already off the planet?" Callan shook his head slowly. "Not yet, but soon. If we don't move fast." Suddenly, a low growl came from behind a tree. Callan pushed Lyra behind him, drawing his plasma knife. Beast stepped out thin, long-legged. With 4 eyes and a collar buzzing with static, it didn't attack. Just sniffed the air and then slowly backed away. "Tracker beast," Callan whispered. "Used by smugglers to follow scent trails." Lyra stared at the collar. Realization. "Dawning, it's following Veli's scent," she said. "Then we're on the right path." The beast turned and vanished into the trees. Without a word, Callan started running after it. And Lyra chased him, her legs burning. Branches slapped her face, and mud sucked at her boots. But she didn't stop. They followed the trail to a small clearing where signs of struggle lay clear. Broken branches, a torn piece of cloth, and small footprints in the mud. Lyra dropped to her knees beside them, tears burning in her eyes. "She was here," she whispered. "She fought." Callan crouched beside her, his face grim. "She's not just a little girl," he said. "She's a fighter." Lyra looked at him sharply, surprised. "Everyone always said she was weak. She said that she cried too much." Callan nodded. "And yet she left signs, broke branches, dropped clues. She wanted to be found." They moved again, following the trail into a rocky slope. The jungle thinned, revealing a metal door carved into a cliff. It was old, rusted, but partially open. Smuggler hideout. Callan said, voice tight, "Are they in there?" Lyra asked, her hands shaking. He didn't answer, just moved forward silently. Inside, the air turned cold. Faint lights flickered in the tunnel, and Lyra held her breath. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the dark. They passed old crates, wires hanging from the walls, and strange stains on the floor. Then came a sound light, soft, almost too faint to notice. A child's whimper. Lyra stopped and grabbed Callan's arm. "Did you hear that?" He nodded and raised his weapon. They moved toward the sound. But before they reached the room, a door slammed shut. A red light blinked on, and a siren screamed through the tunnels. "It's a trap," Callan shouted, pulling Lyra behind cover. As shots fired from hidden turrets, he returned fire, knocking one turret offline. Who sets traps for people looking for a child? Lyra cried, covering her ears. Slavers, Callan growled. They don't care who dies, as long as they stay rich. Once the shooting stopped, they ran down a side corridor. Deeper into the maze, breathing hard, Lyra felt the walls close. In around her, she wanted to scream, to cry, but Callan's voice cut through her fear. "I made a promise," he said, "and I'll keep it." She looked at him through the flickering light. "What promise?" "I told you I'd help," he said, "and I won't stop until she's back in your arms." In that moment, something shifted in Lyra's chest. She'd met many people in her life, aliens from different worlds, even elders from her own race. But none of them had ever said something like that and meant it. None had looked her in the eye and stood by her side when things got dangerous. "I trust you," she whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. Callan didn't smile or nod. He just moved forward and said, "Then let's find her." The tunnel curved downward into darkness ahead of them. Somewhere in the maze of steel and silence, a little girl waited, and her sister, with a human at her side, was coming to bring her home. The hoverbikes roared to life under the twin suns, their engines purring like hungry beasts. Callan tightened the strap on his shoulder pack while Lyra stared at the distant mountains with burning eyes. They had escaped the trap, barely, but every passing minute meant Veli was further away. They needed speed, they needed direction, and most of all, they needed time. "I stole these bikes from the port guards," Callan said casually as he tossed Lyra a helmet. She looked at it with hesitation. "Will this help us find her?" "It'll get us closer to those who took her," he replied, already mounting the bike. Lyra climbed on behind him, arms tightly wrapped around his waist. Her heart thudded not from fear, but from urgency. She had never left the colony borders before, never gone beyond what the elders called safe, but today she chased danger willingly. The jungle blurred past them as they flew down hidden paths. Leaves slapped at their legs, and the wind screamed in their ears. But Lyra's mind wasn't. On the ride it was on Veli. Was she crying? Was she alone? She thought. She had to be strong, like Callan said. They reached a broken transmission tower covered in moss and rust. Callan pulled out a scanning pad and linked it to the wreck. "We're close to one of their supply routes," he said, tapping fast. "Traffickers use it to jump cargo between moons." Lyra stepped closer, her voice low, "And children are cargo to them." Callan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The scanner beeped sharply, and a red blip appeared on the screen. "Ship signature," Callan muttered. "Just left orbit 6 hours ago." Lyra leaned in, her fingers gripping the screen. "Veli?" "Possibly," he said. "They're heading to the Gorgel Belt, a pirate ring, dangerous but predictable." Without a word, Lyra turned back to the bike and climbed on. She didn't need to hear more. She already knew what they had to do. They reached the port by nightfall, the sky glowing orange with toxic clouds. Guards patrolled the platforms, and strange aliens bartered loudly in every direction. Lyra stayed close as Callan moved through the crowd with purpose. He knew who to ask, where to push, and when to threaten. They approached a hunched alien with 3 eyes and a belt full of data chips. Callan grabbed him by the arm and whispered, "I need launch records." Now, the alien hissed, "What's in it for me?" Callan showed his plasma knife. Staying alive, the records came fast. A ship called the Glaive had left during the storm. No official clearance. No cargo listed, but too much power output for an empty hold. "Slave ship," Callan muttered. Disguised as a mining freighter, Lyra felt her knees wobble. "She's on that ship," she said, not as a question, but as a truth. Callan looked at her and didn't deny it. "It's a long shot," he said, "but it's the only lead we've got." They couldn't afford a ticket, and no ship captain would risk the Gorgel Belt for strangers. So Callan did what humans did best. He broke the rules. They sneaked into a cargo hauler, hauling scrap metal to a fueling station near the belt. They hid behind crates, breathing in metal dust, as the ship rumbled through hyperspace. Lyra whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Callan opened one eye and said, "Because if it were my sister, I'd want someone to try." Lyra turned away, eyes stinging. No one had ever cared like that before, not even some of her own blood. She stared out the tiny window at the stars and promised silently, "I'll bring you home, Veli, no matter what it takes." Hours later, the hauler dropped out of hyperspace near a floating metal station shaped like a broken ring. Lights blinked in uneven patterns and strange ships circled it like vultures. "Crimson Station," Callan said. "No law, no mercy. Perfect place for slavers." Lyra added bitterly. They slipped into the docking bay wearing stolen uniforms. The air inside smelled like oil, heat, and secrets. Everyone moved quickly, eyes down, no one asking questions. But Lyra felt them watching their stares, sharp and curious. She gripped Callan's arm tighter. "We'll start in the lower levels," he whispered. "That's where they keep the dirty work," as they disappeared into the crowd. Lyra held the cracked orb in her palm. She had no proof, no guarantee. Only a human's promise and a sister's hope. But somehow, that was enough to make her walk straight into the mouth of danger. Because if her sister was inside that station, then they'd tear it apart, floor by floor, to find her. The entrance to Crimson Station hissed open like a mouth ready to swallow them. Dark red lights flickered above steel hallways stained by smoke and time. The air was thick with heat, oil, and the smell of too many species forced to live too. Close, Lyra's heart pounded as she stepped onto the deck beside Callan, her hand never leaving the cracked orb in her pocket. This place was nothing like her colony. No order, no kindness, just noise, tension, and sharp eyes that followed every move. Creatures with scarred faces leaned against walls. Some blinking too fast, others not at all. Many wore weapons openly. And none looked friendly. Callan adjusted his stolen uniform and nodded. "Keep your head down. Don't speak unless I do," he said softly. Lyra nodded. But her fear boiled into quiet anger every second here. Her sister was getting farther away. They pushed through crowds toward a staircase marked in 6 different languages. Each one warned the same thing. Lower decks restricted. That meant they were in the right place. They passed a caged vendor selling illegal tech. Another offering off-world meat still twitching. Then a voice cut through the crowd, deep and insect-like. "You looking for the one they dragged in?" Callan froze and turned. A bug-eyed alien sat behind a glass tank of glowing eggs, antennae twitching. "What did you see?" Callan asked, stepping closer. The alien smirked, its mandibles clicking. "Small one, pale skin, cried all night." Lyra's breath hitched. "Where is she now?" "Payment first," the alien said, tapping the glass with one claw. Callan reached for his belt. But before he could grab anything, a bolt of plasma struck the alien's head. The bug-like creature dropped lifeless behind the counter. Screams echoed, and everyone ducked as more plasma shots followed. "Sniper!" Callan shouted, grabbing Lyra and pulling her into a dark side hallway. They crouched behind broken crates while alarms blared across the station. Security drones flew overhead, scanning every face. Lyra's arm was bleeding from a graze. But she didn't cry. She looked up at Callan and said, "They killed him because he knew something." Callan checked the wound and ripped a strip of his sleeve to wrap it. "This confirms it," he said. "They're trying to erase anyone who saw her." They couldn't use the main stairs. Now guards were already sweeping the levels. So Callan led her to a hidden service hatch behind a wall panel. He kicked it open and crawled into the dark vent. "Come on," he said, his voice echoing. Lyra hesitated only a second before following. Inside the vent, it was hot and narrow. Metal scraped against her back as they crawled through the shadows. Voices echoed from below, guards barking orders. Drunk smugglers laughing. Then, faintly, a new sound reached them. A child's voice, thin and hoarse, crying. Lyra froze, heart thudding. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Callan nodded. "Keep going." They reached a grate and peeked through. Below them was a storage bay with cells stacked like crates. Some held adults, others empty but one. Far in the corner held something small, a child with pale skin, knees pulled to her chest. Head down, Veli. Lyra gasped, tears stinging her eyes. She moved to open the grate, but Callan stopped her. "Not yet," he said. "We don't know how many guards there are." 2 large alien guards with heavy rifles stood near the entrance. A control panel blinked beside them, likely controlling all the cell doors. Callan narrowed his eyes. "We'll need a distraction," he said, pulling a small device from his belt. "What is that?" Lyra asked. "Something very human," he replied with a smirk. He threw the device through another vent, opening near the power cables. A few seconds later, a blinding flash filled the room, followed by a burst of thick smoke. Chaos erupted. Guards shouted and fired blindly into the mist. Callan kicked the grate open and dropped down, landing hard but fast. Lyra jumped behind him. Racing toward the control panel, her fingers flew across the keys, guessing at the alien script. One wrong touch could set off alarms, but something clicked and the cage doors hissed open. "Veli?" Lyra screamed. The little girl looked up with wide eyes. Her lips trembled. But when she saw Lyra, she crawled fast and fell into her sister's arms. "I knew you'd come," she whispered, voice weak. Lyra sobbed and held her tight. "I promised I would," she whispered back. Callan fired at the last standing guard, then turned to them. "Time's up, we need to move," with Veli in Lyra's arms. They ran through the mist-filled bay and into the shadows. Behind them, alarms began to scream louder than ever. The entire station was waking up, and now they weren't just visitors. They were enemies who had just stolen something the slavers didn't want to lose. The moment they entered the lower hangar, it was like stepping into the lungs of a beast. Red light pulsed across the chamber, blinking from warning panels and scanners mounted to the ceiling. Cargo crates lined the floor, and strange machines hissed steam into the air like the place was breathing. Veli clung tightly to Lyra's neck, her small arms trembling, her face buried against her sister's shoulder. "She's burning up," Lyra whispered, touching her little sister's forehead. Callan glanced over and nodded. "They drugged her," he said grimly. "Not enough to knock her out, just enough to make her stop fighting." Lyra's throat tightened with rage. But now wasn't the time for tears. They had to escape. No, they had to do it fast. Behind them, doors were locking with heavy thuds. Echoing like closing tombs, Callan led the way through a back corridor, slipping behind old transport containers. "This way," he said, pointing to a hidden elevator shaft. "I mapped it earlier in case we had to make a fast exit." Lyra followed without question. Carrying Veli-like precious cargo, her legs ached. Her arms were numb, but she refused to slow down. She was running on love now pure. Raw and unstoppable, they reached the shaft. And Callan pried open the access panel. He dropped down the maintenance ladder first, then signaled for Lyra to hand Veli to him. She passed the child carefully, then followed, climbing into the dark, greasy metal tunnel. Halfway down, sirens blared louder, and the shaft lights turned red. The station had detected movement. Security protocols had been activated. "We need a ship," Callan said as they reached the bottom. Lyra looked around the dim hangar they had dropped into. Rows of vessels sat parked, some small, others massive, but only one had power humming from its engines. Only one was preparing for launch. "The Glaive," Callan said coldly. The same slaver ship that had stolen Veli away was about to flee again, with or without them. "If we board that ship, they'll kill us," Lyra said, her voice shaking. Callan's expression hardened. "Not if we take control first." They sprinted across the loading bay, ducking behind landing gear and crates. Lyra still carried Veli, who was fading fast. They reached the underside of the Glaive, where the cargo ramp was just beginning to close. "Hold on tight," Callan said, and then he sprinted, sliding under the rising door. Lyra followed, barely, clearing the edge before it slammed shut behind them. Inside the ship, alarms were already blaring, and the floor vibrated as engines warmed up. They entered a narrow hallway where two guards stood frozen in surprise. Callan didn't hesitate. With precise shots, he stunned both before they could react. Then he turned to Lyra and pointed down the hall. "Bridge is that way. Control the ship, and we win." "I've never flown anything," she said breathlessly. "You don't have to," he replied. "You just have to press what I tell you." They ran, heartbeats pounding like war drums. At the end of the corridor, A steel door sealed itself with a heavy hiss. Callan cursed and slammed a code into the keypad. "Give me 10 seconds," he said. Lyra shifted her weight, holding Veli tighter. The moment the door opened, 3 crew members charged out. Callan ducked a blade, grabbed the attacker's arm, and slammed him into the wall. Lyra kicked another in the leg and elbowed him in the chest. She surprised herself. Fear had no room left inside her, only the instinct to protect. They pushed into the bridge, where flashing lights covered the consoles like a storm of stars. Callan threw one pilot out of the chair and locked the door behind them. "Strap her in," he said, pointing to a safety seat. Lyra secured Veli gently, brushing her hair back and whispering, "We're almost home." Callan's fingers flew across the controls. "They've already started the jump sequence." He said, "I'm overriding it." The ship jolted, and Lyra stumbled into the wall. "They're fighting back," she said. Callan growled. Not for long. He rerouted power, changed the flight path, and locked out every system he could reach. Then he hit the comm panel and broadcasted a signal to the station. "This is Captain of the Glaive," he said, voice flat and emotionless. "Ship has been compromised. We're leaking core plasma. All systems failing." He winked at Lyra. "That should clear the path outside." The hangar shield opened and launch clearance was granted in panic. Inside, the Glaive rose shakily, guided by Callan's stolen hands as the stars opened before them. Lyra collapsed beside Veli and kissed her forehead. "You're safe," she whispered again and again. Callan sat back, breathing hard, hands trembling slightly. They had done it against all odds, but the chase wasn't over. "We're not out yet," he said, his eyes scanning the radar. "The slavers will come after us, and when they do, we'll be ready." The stars outside the ship turned sharp and bright as the Glaive pushed into open space. Alarms still echoed in the corridors, and smoke curled from the vents. But the engines were running, and the slaver ship was no longer under slaver hands. Callan locked the controls and turned to Lyra, sweat shining on his face. "We bought ourselves 5 minutes," he said. "That's not much." Lyra replied, still cradling her sister. Veli had opened her eyes again, though she blinked slowly and looked confused. Lyra brushed her hair back, smiling through the fear. "You're with me now." "Veli?" she whispered. "You're going home." Callan tapped into the ship's emergency pod system. "There are 3 escape pods on this deck," he said. "I'll program one for jump distance to the Kara moon." "Kara?" Lyra asked. "Refugee station," Callan answered. "Safe, hidden. And they won't ask questions." He guided them down the hall, every step filled with tension. The ship groaned around them as if angry about being stolen. The lights flickered again, and warning beeps echoed louder now. Lyra knew the slavers would be tracking the ship if they weren't already chasing it. They had maybe minutes before trouble exploded back into their lives. They reached the escape pod chamber, and Callan began punching codes into the terminal. "Lyra," he said without looking, "you and Veli get in. Now, what about you?" She asked. "I need to delay the launch protocol, or the slavers will trace the pod." He replied, "I'll launch you, then I'll find another way off." "No," Lyra said sharply. "We're not leaving you behind." Callan looked up at her, and for the first time, his eyes weren't steady. They looked tired, full of something between sadness and peace. "I made a promise," he said, "and I kept it. That doesn't mean you die keeping it." She snapped. "I'm not dying," he said. "I'm buying time." Veli reached out weakly and grabbed Callan's sleeve. "Don't go," she whispered. Callan knelt down and held her hand gently. "You're the bravest little girl I've ever met," he said. "You kept fighting until help came." The chamber lights went red. A sensor blared. 2 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace. Behind them. "They're here," Callan said, standing. He opened the pod and motioned for Lyra. "Now," he commanded. Lyra stared at him, tears forming. "Come with us," she begged. He smiled, tired but kind. "I will, just not yet." She stepped into the pod, still holding Veli. Callan tapped the launch sequence and overrode the beacon trace. Then, just before the door closed, he handed Lyra something small. It was a chip, shiny and worn. "Coordinates to a safe planet," he said. "Use it. If anything goes wrong," the door sealed, and Callan disappeared from view. Seconds later, the pod launched into space like a shooting star. Lyra pressed her hand to the glass as the ship shrank behind her. She didn't cry, she couldn't, not until she knew he made it out. Inside the glaive, Callan moved fast. He jammed the comms, blocked the tracking signals, and armed the ship's last defense systems. The enemy ships hailed him, demanding surrender. But Callan didn't answer. Instead, he powered up the ship's core and set a delayed overload. "Let's see how badly you want this ship back," he muttered. Then he sprinted toward the engineering deck where an old drop pod lay buried beneath scrap metal. It was rusted, outdated, and barely functional. But maybe, just maybe, it would fly. The slaver ships began firing. The hull shook violently, and sparks fell from the ceiling. Callan shoved debris aside and climbed into the pod. He powered it up, overriding safety checks. The engines sputtered to life, coughing heat and sparks. With a shout, he slammed the launch lever. The pod shot downward, ripped from the glaive just as the slaver ships opened fire again from space. The glaive burned bright tanned, then exploded in a flash that lit up the stars. Far away, inside the refugee pod, Lyra held Veli close as the shockwave lit the sky behind them. She gasped, covering Veli's eyes. The ship was gone just like that. But then, a blinking light appeared on the tracker chip Callan had given her. She stared at it, heart racing. "He's alive," she whispered. "Somehow. Some way he made it." The pod landed safely on Kara's moon, and medics rushed to help them. Veli was taken into care. And Lyra walked out into the starlight, still gripping the chip. She didn't know where or when, but she would find him. Again, because the human who saved her sister had done what no one else dared to do. And Lyra wasn't going to let that story end with fire. Not when it deserved to begin with hope. The moon of Kara was a quiet place. No wars, no weapons, only refugees and the people trying to heal them. Its skies were soft blue during the day and silver at night, filled with low winds that hummed like lullabies. It was the kind of place where survivors came to forget the fire. Lyra stood on the hill above the medical dome, watching the sun rise through pale mist. It had been 3 months since the explosion of the glaive, 3 months since the escape pod crash-landed here, and 3 months since Callan disappeared into the stars with no signal. No message, no goodbye. Veli was safe now, strong enough to walk and laugh again. She ran through the wildflower fields with other children, her giggles now free of fear. But Lyra couldn't forget the man who made that joy possible. Every night, she looked to the stars and asked the same silent question: "Where are you?" She kept the chip he gave her in a small pouch worn from her touch. It still blinked faintly, like a heartbeat in metal. But it never gave coordinates, never spoke, just blinked, like it was waiting for something. Then one morning, the dome's warning bell rang softly. An incoming ship's maul, unregistered, limping through orbit with damage across its hull. Lyra stood frozen on the hill, heart thudding. No one else paid much attention. Refugee crafts came often. But something about this one felt different. She ran to the landing field, boots pounding on soft soil. The ship landed hard, steam hissing from its belly. The hatch opened slowly with a screech of metal. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a shape appeared in the doorway, tall, limping, covered in soot and bandages. But his eyes, when they met hers, were the same, tired, steady, and full of quiet fire. "Callan," she whispered, too shocked to move. He smiled gently and stepped down, one hand gripping the railing. "You didn't wait for me, did you?" he said with a grin. Lyra didn't answer. She ran forward and threw her arms around him, nearly knocking him off his feet. His body was warm, solid, real. He hugged her back without a word. Veli came running seconds later, squealing with joy. She hugged his leg tightly, her tiny voice shouting, "You came back! You came back!" Callan bent down with a wince and ruffled her hair. "I told you I would," he said softly. That evening, they sat under the stars together. No alarms, no weapons. No war, just silence and the soft glow of moonlight. Lyra passed him a drink and asked the question that had lived in her chest for weeks. "How did you survive the blast?" He chuckled, then winced from the pain. "Old drop pod," he said, "held together by rust and luck. It threw me far, past their scan range, spent 2 weeks floating, waiting for a cargo hauler to find me. Why didn't you contact us?" she asked. Callan looked at her and shrugged. "No signal, no voice left in me. Just hope. And this," he added, tapping the blinking chip. "It kept me connected." They sat in silence, watching Veli chase fireflies nearby. Lyra turned to him and said quietly, "You're not just a man who helped us. You're part of us now." Callan looked at her for a long moment. "No one's ever said that to me," he replied. Lyra smiled, tears in her eyes. Well, someone had to. From that night on, Callan never left Kara. He built shelters with his hands, repaired ships. With his tools, he laughed, rested, and lived something he hadn't done in a long time. And every night, he watched the stars with 2 alien sisters who had once been strangers. Now, they were home.